tomorrow. Saying it's just another day. You will see tomorrow.
Asiatic, cream of the planet Earth, seasoning every square inch since its birth. Alpha, Omega, last and the first. Build a temple, feed my church. Understanding is a process related to wisdom. Kingdoms are built upon knowledge. This party track right here makes you holler. Number one at the top of the chart, stacking dollars. Shout to the Conquest fam. Buy back the Caribbean with the same brand. Grams exchange hands on streets, merchants trade like the raw warriors. Damn, this great, unconquerable as the tribe of Shabazz. If you recognize true gems, this is a class. I'm a small, humble fella who kick your ass. If you ain't on the dance floor now, come on, dance.
Man, your root is growing, and your vibes is flowing. Yeah, got to take it slow, and you see tomorrow. Saying it's just another day. You will see tomorrow. Yeah, you will see tomorrow. Oh yeah.
This is a scribe with the golden smile.
This one dedicated to the disciplined child.
Marry the beat, we walk down the aisle.
One rude boy because you're well versatile.
Chillin' with the rhythm and we killin' with the style.
Just feel the sound them walk all 100 miles.
Lay it down like a floor full of tiles.
We see when we suit with the pattern and style.
Man, your root is growing, and your vibes is flowing. Got to take it slow, and you see tomorrow. Saying it's just another day. You will see tomorrow. Oh yeah, you will see tomorrow. Just a little bit of, yeah. Just a little bit of, whoa, oh yeah. Saying it's just another day. Just a little bit of, yeah. Just a little bit of, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You will see that I'm a dance now. Just a little bit of, I'm a shake it now. Just a little bit of, just do that, yeah. Just a little bit of.
Yeah, it's the Conquest crew. We coming for you, your friends too. They thought that we never knew. It's the Conquest crew. We coming for you, your friends too. Tell me what you gonna do. It's the Conquest crew. We coming for you, your friends too. They thought that we never knew. It's the Conquest crew. We coming for you, your friends too. Tell me what you gonna do.
In the land of the beast, we are found sound of the streets. Misguided, we eat that freedom's in the mark of the beast. Destroys my soul to know that all we seeking is peace. Tell Jah we seek, we destined to remain as the least. Perception of realities, pollution can often cause confusion until the Father reveals a world of illusion designed to trap the mind behind bars. We'll rise from graves when we know who we are.
It's just another day in the West, living up the more for the less. Yes, the people who deserve the very least are the people with the most. Yes, it's just another day in the West, living for the babe and the press. Yes, and still the people who the least are the people with the most.
When will the Father come, raising us all out of the ghetto slums, teaching us that our lives are the sum total of thoughts, doctrine implemented with force, whipping a horse, which were tools of the trade in Holocaust days. Look at the many ways the media attack us. They have you thinking our occupation is carjackers, international drug trafficking, gun clappers, as if it's always the way that we were. Tragedies occur when there's new laws feeding the bellies of rich, taking food from the poor people's table. The average individual unstable, desiring change but powerless, believing they ain't able to make a difference, buying into the system, the same that they built that's not grown up to diss them. Marley said the truth would offend, therefore I take refuge in Allah against the guises of men.
It's just another day in the West, living up the more for the less. Yes, the people who deserve the very least are the people with the most. Yes, it's just another day in the West, praying for the babe and the press. Yes, and still the people who the least are the people with the most.
Well, I'll be rocking enemies overseas like the breeze of the Socrates of rich melodies. And if you take away the keys, singers and MCs ain't nothing but cheese on the shelf, not a reason why we ain't ready for war every season with the big belly Babylon treason. In these days where the least are the rebels and the poor never ever get to be the chosen.
Just another day in the West, living up the more for the less. Yes, the people who deserve the very least are the people with the most. Yes, it's just another day in the West, praying for the babe and the press. Yes, and still the people who the least are the people with the most. It's just another day in the West, living up the more for the less. Yes, the people who deserve the very least are the people with the most. Yes, it's just another day in the West, praying for the babe and the press. Yes, and still the people who the least are the people with the most.
Yeah, it's the conquest crew. We coming for you, the friends too. We thought that we never knew. It's the conquest crew. We coming for you, the friends too. Tell me what you gonna do. It's the conquest crew. We coming for you, the friends too. They thought that we never knew. It's the conquest crew. We coming for you, the friends too. Tell me what you gonna do.
Yeah, come party. Let's do it with the R-O-O-T-S. Conquest, E-Vibes, Friends Joe, Mosaic, Don Dada. Come on, did you stand? Come on, get fly with us. Yo, jump in the whip and ride with us. Come on.
Crazy city people get brainwashed.
What you say?
Yeah.
What you say?
Yeah. And ever busy people, them most crash.
Only one way they can end. What you say, son?
Crazy city people
All around the world.
get
What you say?
brainwashed. Yeah. Yeah. And ever busy people,
What?
them
What?
most crash.
Come on.
Yeah. While Rasta never be ascending, where university chiefs could only dream to reach. And the vibes it never ending,
Never.
always comprehending the ways of levity chiefs as they roam the streets.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. How are you doing? Welcome to the third series of Friday Mind Reset Live. So I'd like to just say a big hello to the guests that we have in the room. Can you put a comment in the chat box just to make sure that I know that you can hear me and that you can see me? I see that we have Natty, Alaide, Philippa, Sharon, Shawnette. How you all doing? Can you hear me okay? Can you give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me? Okay, fantastic. Shawnette says she can hear real clear. Where you been, Shawnette? We've been missing you. I see we have Alaida's okay in the group. How you doing, Alaida? So audio is clear. Okay, so welcome. I hope everyone had a real good week as I have. It's been a very interesting start to the month. So much happening and so much to talk about, but I guess we'll get through some of that this evening as we go through tonight's show. So really pleased to be back running our Friday Mind Reset Live. For those of you who are not aware, who are joining us on Facebook or YouTube, these evenings, we're going to be running every Friday until, certainly for the next 5 months. So that's a big stint for me and the team. But each month, we will be showcasing, sharing a theme which is stemmed from the book that I wrote, the GPS system. So the GPS system, which stands for Grow Personal Success, is based on 5 pillars that underpin our lives that we need to give attention to. And so those 5 pillars are your mindset, your business, finance, and money, and your relationships, the state of your relationships, the state of your health and well-being, and the state of your belief system or spirituality. So each month we choose a theme, and each week we will break down and through conversation and discussion, give you some insight. So these 5 months are really a way of you getting a sense and a flavor of what the GPS system is all about and the community that we're building of conscious, creative individuals who are wanting to create, then grow their personal vision of success. So I'm really pleased because this evening and for the whole of the month of June, we are going to be focusing on the topic that everybody loves to talk about, which is business, money, and finance. And so I have a guest that's going to be joining me in a little while by the name of Paul Elliot. And I just want to give you a little bit of a backstory because this evening is also particularly very important to me because we will be celebrating the life of my business mentor, Errol Abramson, who I nicknamed the billionaire who cares, who sadly passed away last year. And it's particularly symbolic for me because almost exactly a year ago, on the 30th of May last year, which was the day of his 70th birthday, we staged a webinar, and it's on Facebook. So if you're into business and you want to get some tips from someone who's run 47 businesses, all of them successfully, then you can go and check that out on the Mind Reset group. But I wanted to do something particularly to remember Errol because he has been instrumental in my growth the last 24 months, certainly the last 12 months. I've seen my mind expand. You know, Errol had this saying that goes like this. He said, the mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. And so true, so said. You know, he was really hard on me as he tends to be with people who he believes in, and really got me to think differently about what I was doing. You know, up until then, yes, I wanted to make a difference, but I was kind of okay just coasting along, helping a few people. And he turned around to me one day and said, Tony, you know, what you're doing is really selfish. And it took me aback. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, if the work that you're doing is really making an impact in people's lives, then it's really selfish of you to not be focused on making a greater impact. And that was the day my whole mindset changed to another level. And I'm the mindset guy, right? But you see, we all need coaches. We all need teachers. We all need people to show us how to get to the next level. And you know what? For someone who was steeped in business, had run businesses for, I think the best part, if not over 50 years, 47 businesses, all of them successful with not one failure. I think he was well placed to be able to teach me a thing or two. In fact, I actually believe that life sent him to me to give me some understanding, a deeper understanding about business. Because remember, prior to that, I've had a spiritual mentor for some 38 years. And so that was really where I was anchored in. And that's really where I was coming from. But in order to make a greater impact, you can't do that without understanding the fundamentals of business and being able to apply them in your business and then grow. And so I have been thinking about doing this event for some time. But then something happened really early on in this year, which I'm going to share because I just think the whole thing is just, you know, amazing. I think it was around early February, and my mind just flashed, and Paul Elliot came to mind. And so I sent him a text and said, Paul, how you doing? It'd be really good if we could catch up sometime. And you'll see where I'm going with this in a moment. So within 5 minutes, I think I get a call from Paul. And I'm like, wow, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. And he says, well, yeah, I called you because I was thinking of you this morning. And I was like, okay, that's funny because, you know, in my world, there's no such thing as coincidences. So we had a chat, and I said, well, I'm having a meeting with someone tomorrow that you've referred me to marketing. And so, yeah, you know, we should catch up sometime. And I left it like that. The following day, the meeting that I was due to have with this said company didn't happen for one reason or the other. And so I called Paul, and he said, look, you know, I've been thinking, and I just want to help and support what you're doing. So why don't we start working together? Now, that was literally how we began. And that was like 3 months ago. What was interesting was that, unbeknown to Paul, out of his group, the EDI group, he had spoken out of all of the members in that group. Errol had said, I think you should work with this gentleman, Paul. So for me, I feel as if, even though Errol has passed, he's still kind of guiding us, certainly guiding me, in as much as his wish is now here, where I'm now working with Paul. Paul and I are now working together, and it's been a beautiful journey. So when I was sharing with Paul that I wanted to do something with Errol, it was no better person to join me this evening, where we will talk about business, we'll talk about the power of coaching, we'll talk about anything and everything related to business, and you get to ask questions. Now, just to put it into context, there'll be 2 parts to this evening. Part 1 is really a general introduction where we are broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. But around 9 o'clock, we go private for our members, and that's where you get the opportunity to ask deep and meaningful questions. So if you would like to join us, then my team will put the registration details for membership. Our Rich Society community is a private community where we support one another in business and just consciously and conscious awareness, like-minded people supporting one another. So if you want to continue the conversation and ask your burning question, then join. They'll put the link in, and it's around £40 and a few pennies every month. So you'll get to join us in the private Q&A this week and the following weeks, where my guests are going to include Chris Coney, where we're going to talk all things cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and some of the exciting things that he's doing, as well as my good friend, Bola Ranson, who is a property guru. So it's going to be really good at bringing and inviting some of my conscious friends to join me, where we can talk and share with you and give you insights. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite my good friend, the strategic rebel, Paul, to join us. So just bear with me a moment whilst I locate Paul, and then we will take it away. Okay, so I'm just promoting. Paul, are you there? Let's see if we can find him.
Unmute, start video.
Hey,
Yeah.
Paul.
Ah. Hey.
Okay, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm really, really good. It's really good to see you join us today. I mean, it's a long time coming that we've been talking about doing something for Errol in his memory and in his legacy. But before we come on to talk about Errol, I want to talk a little bit about Paul and that title, the Strategic Rebel. Tell us a little bit about Paul, the Strategic Rebel.
Well, the kind of, I guess the short version, because if I go into the whole story, it'll probably take us a couple of hours. But the short version is very much that I, probably like yourself, probably like a lot of people listening, had been raised in an environment, work hard, get good grades at school, with this whole view of, initially go to university. And, I was the first person in my family to do that. And my parents were so proud of that. But then I came out of university and it's like, you've got this degree, you've got to go get a job. And that was the whole point. You're supposed to get a better education to get a better job. And I was like, yeah, I don't want that. So I tried it. I tried to get a job and successfully did interviews and successfully got employed. And what I discovered then was that I had a habit of getting fired. So I'd last, I think the longest I lasted was 12 months. And I've had 3 jobs in my life. And so at the end of the third one, I was like, this is not for me. I'm meant to do something else. I meant to follow a different path. I didn't really know what it was at the time. And so I just got started. I'd got interested in initially something called neurolinguistic programming, which I think you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And I'd seen Tony Robbins a couple of times and I was inspired by what he was doing. So I thought, I like this idea of helping people. And that kind of put me on a different track. And so since then, out of, I guess, the path I've followed, the lessons I've had, the people I've met, including Errol, then I sort of shaped my own life based on my own desires, my own rules. And that was the rebel part. It was like, I don't want to live the life somebody else wants to live. I want to live the life I want to live. I want to have the experiences that I want to have. And I want to look back on my life when I finally get to meet Errol again and go, what a ride. That was the whole point. And then the strategic part was very much, well, strategic just means to do something deliberately. It's like, we're not leaving it to chance. We're not leaving it to just sort of random throwing of the dice. We kind of say, no, we're going to direct this. We're going to make this go the way we want it to go as much as you can. I mean, I know, if you want to make God laugh, show your plans and all that kind of stuff. But it was very much, I'm going to direct as much as I can. Whatever I can influence, I will influence. Whatever skills I need to learn, I'll learn them. But it's got to be fun. Everything's got to be fun. And that's been the guiding philosophy. That sounds like a big word, but the guiding sort of premise of most of my adult life. So.
Wow, that's really pretty incredible. And I mean, you've done a lot of stuff. I mean, you've spoken in front of large audiences and shared your message and your philosophy. And it is pretty much a philosophy because you do business differently to the general herd or tide of people. This is what I've noticed. And that's why your name came up when I was speaking with Errol. So what is it about your philosophy that makes you kind of different? Because you're not into selling products, you approach the whole business very differently to mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very clear that business is a vehicle. And within that, the purpose of that vehicle is twofold, really. One is to provide for the lifestyle that I want to lead. So, for myself, my family, allow me to contribute in the ways I want to contribute. But also as a business, it has to add value and it has to enhance my customers' lives in some way. Like there's no point to me running a business that offers a product or a service that isn't in some way very tangibly impacting the quality of someone's life and very positively. So, if you look at the businesses that I'm involved in, they're all involved in very specific areas of people's lives. So whether it's from a personal development point of view, it's personal development mainly focused on the money aspect of someone's life, because that tends to be a big problem for a lot of people. So if I can help them solve that, then that can be a catalyst for them to leave a better quality of life. And obviously there's a ripple effect of that. Then the other sides of, the other businesses I run are health-based. So if I can help someone have a great quality of health and support their health through the length of their life and maybe help elongate their life in some way so they have an even better life, then I want to do that. Whereas I'm not money focused in the sense of, I'll start a business because I think it'll make money. I've got no interest in that whatsoever. I'm only interested where I can add value and tangibly change somebody's life. Then I'm interested. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense because I mean, I've never asked you the question before, but I'm listening to you and I'm like, sounds like me. I'm like, okay, that's why we roll. That's why we
for sure. Yeah, we got similar values in that respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I was saying, when I was speaking to Errol, obviously we shared the same mentor, the business mentor in that regard. And so now I can understand why he would say, you know what, I think you and Paul should hook up. Because obviously if he's speaking to you and he knows that that's your essence and he's speaking with me, and then it makes perfect sense. So we've been working together for some 3 months now, and it's been interesting to see how you work. I mean, damn, you are strategic and you're really passionate about wanting to make a difference in people's lives. And I guess that was the thing that we all shared, myself, you, and Errol, in that, he had that vision of wanting to grow a global community of 100 million entrepreneurs. I mean, I wanted to devote a little bit of time to Errol this afternoon, or should I say this evening, as well as talk about some business. But what comes to mind when you think back in terms of some of the greatest lessons that you learned from Errol where business is concerned?
Errol, it was interesting enough. Have we got time for the story of how I met him, or?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Because what had happened was, and this is back in 2014, and funnily enough, in 2014, I'd never ever in my life been to South Africa, and yet in 2014, I ended up going 3 times and had an absolutely fantastic time. And so the first trip there was a local promoter based out of Johannesburg, and he wanted to put on 3 events: so Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. And so there was about 6 or 7 speakers that he reached out to. I was one of them. And so I went over there with a view to, promoting what I was doing at the time, the events that I was running at the time. And so the night before the event, I'd got into South Africa, we went out for dinner, and that was when I first met Errol. And I was kind of a little bit jet lagged, a little bit tired. So I didn't do a lot of talking at the time, but Errol didn't stop, and you remember Errol, he's very funny. He's very outgoing. He just never stops. So it was really, really funny. And then the next morning, one of my habits is, or superstitions, if you like, is whenever I'm speaking at an event, and there was this first event in Johannesburg, probably about 1,000 people, 1,000-person event. So I like to get into the room before the event kicks off and sit in the audience. So all the seats are empty, but I like to sit at the back of the audience and look at the stage. And it kind of helps me get a sense of what people are going to be seeing when I'm on stage.
Yeah.
I just sit there and I kind of do this little process in my head. And Errol came over while I was doing this and he said, like, you know, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing this. And I explained it because, it sounds really interesting. And this was he was telling me that this was kind of his introduction to the whole seminar world. Right. So he'd been to a couple of events and for the most part, he wasn't impressed. So we just chatted, you know, and he wasn't impressed on a couple of levels. One, the quality of some of the material that people were sharing, and also some of the bullshit that some of the people were sharing. And, you know, he said, like, you know, speakers who'll say on stage that they earn X amount or they drive however many Lamborghinis and they got a different Lamborghini for each day of the week and all this kind of stuff, which I don't do. It's like, it's nonsense. And Errol said, you know, it only takes 2 minutes to get one of his team members to check out somebody's real financial status online. And, you know, he knows they're telling lies, you know. And so we hit it off because at the time I was going through a real financial challenge. And I was totally open about it, you know, like right from the off-gut. I said, look, I'm here, one, because I want to share a message, but I said, I got no money at the moment. I said, I've been very good at making money, losing money, making money, losing money. I said, whereas now, this time around, I'm going to make it and keep it. And he said, you know what? Well, that's a good revelation. That's a good idea. But he liked the fact that I was so open and so transparent and so honest because I had nothing to hide. So I then got on stage. I think there was the guy doing the introduction, Robin Banks. He did the intro and somebody went on before me. Then I came up on stage and did my little piece. And I came off stage and certainly my presentations, as you know, from the work we've been doing together, I'm very focused on, I build a lot of rapport with the audience. I want them to know who I am as a person. I want to know that I'm here to support them. And then at the end, I'm also very commercial in the sense of this is a journey and your life isn't going to change unless you continue this journey with me. Like otherwise, if you leave this event today, you go back home, you get caught back in whatever you're doing. And so I'm very, very forceful at the end in terms of helping people make a decision, get off the fence, make a decision. And so when I finished, I came off and I walked out of the seminar room to go grab a coffee and Errol followed me out. And he came up, he said, you're amazing. He said, you are absolutely brilliant. One of the most talented speakers and certainly one of the most talented sales speakers I've ever met. And I laughed, you know, and I made a joke about, well, you need to get out more and see more people. But we just hit it off. Wow. And then the next morning, or I think it was the following morning, we were on a flight to Durban and Errol and I ended up sitting next to each other for the whole journey, which is about an hour's flight. And we just went deep into all sorts of aspects in life. And interesting enough, Errol giving you a hard time, during that flight to Durban, Errol looked at me at one point after I'd sort of laid out my story and we've been talking for about 3/4 of an hour. And he said, I know exactly what's going on with you. He said, you're not asking for enough. And it was very much that idea of like, you're thinking too small. Yeah. You know, and I think there was a common theme there with Errol. And it was like, you've got to ask for more. He said, stop thinking in a couple of million and start thinking in hundreds of millions. You know, it's like, because that's where you should be. And that's the kind of, the kind of impact you should be having. And that's what kicked it off.
And how do you find it, Paul, in as much as when you have someone who is so far ahead of you in whatever field it is, then speak to you in that kind of affirming way? Does it not do something to you? Because for me, it had huge potential because it's like, what, me? Because, you know, sometimes we don't see ourselves as others might see the potential. Yeah. Did that resonate? Did that happen with you?
Yeah, very much so. Because I think, you know, when we see the world through our own perceptions. Errol saw the world through his perceptions, and Errol saw you, he saw me through his filters, through his way of looking at the world. And what he saw from my perspective, or what he explained to me, was he sees a lot of talent, and he sees a lot of talent that's not properly being used. And that was very much kind of related to, if you're not asking for enough, then you're not putting yourself out enough. You're not doing enough. So you're not really allowing that talent to shine through.
Wow.
And that was a big thing for me. And it forced me, whilst we were there, when we got to Cape Town, I actually went off one morning and sat in a coffee shop in Cape Town and just mapped out a whole vision. And then I went back and shared it with him, and that kind of kicked things off. And then from that point, he then said to me, so look, we got to stay in touch. He said, I'm going to coach you. I'm going to mentor you. He said, and we're going to kind of start moving things forward. But I would say once we got into the commercial aspect of things, one of his big thoughts for me was he said, look, stop thinking in terms of single businesses, start thinking in terms of multiple businesses. He said, if you can learn to run multiple businesses, you can do anything, because it's really very asset focused. It's very much understanding that you are, and this was Errol's philosophy. He had ideas, he had businesses, but he would build a team and then let the team run the business. Then he's on to the next one. Then he builds another team and he lets them run it. Then he's on to the next one, and so on and so on and so on. And it was that whole approach that he wanted to instill in me. It was that think in terms of creating assets that continue to work without you, that enhance the quality of the people's lives who are working within it, and obviously offer a product or a service that enhances the value of the people who are buying the service.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing.
And that stuck with me. I mean, you can't get away from that, because it's like, and all of a sudden your brain changes, because you kind of go from that, I'm stuck in this little business wondering how to make it work sustainably. And then all of a sudden you're going, oh, well, hold on a minute. This isn't about one business. This is like, how many different places do you want to impact people's lives? How many different businesses do you want to run? And then if you're going to run multiple businesses, you can't be thinking about the detail of this one. You got to be looking at the bigger picture, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your story, resonates very much with mine. I mean, I met Errol 2 years after you met him, but it was a similar thing, and I met him at an event, a 3-day event, that I was coming kind of umming and ahhing, should I go, should I not go? Because like I was relatively new to this whole personal development space, and certainly I hadn't spent that kind of money on a 3-day event, when they're charging like a couple of grand and stuff like that. So I was umming and ahhing, simply because I was going because the person that was running the event, I'd seen him on video, didn't know him before, but the video seemed really kind of glossy and it sounded like he was saying some really good stuff. And so I wanted to check him out. And so I went. In the end, I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And it really, for me, just speaks about why it's important for us as individuals to always step outside of your comfort zone. Because if I hadn't taken that step of faith and paid that money, yeah, the event was good. Do I remember a lot of the things that I experienced over the 3 days? No. But what it did, and that's not to put a slant on, the presentation, because what happened, or the different speakers there, what happened, I got to meet Errol. Yeah. And I got to meet a few other people. But the fact is, myself and Errol, we connected and we exchanged emails, because, he's thrown his phone away a few years ago. And so we had a couple of communications by email, and then I just put it to bed until about 10 months later. Then he sends me an email out of the blue saying, yo, Tony, what's going on? I'm coming to London to do an event. How you doing? And that's when we started to have conversations. And I was like, okay, we did some back and forth via email. And then he was like, let's have a conversation. And we began to have some conversations. And, I was still kind of curious about the guy, because I was like, why is he interested in me, kind of thing? You're a billionaire. But then he said one day, I'd like to mentor you. And then it really, for me, was like, okay, where's this going? Like, I just didn't get it. But I had a copy of his book. And so I never forget, I think we had the conversation on the Thursday. And so I decided, I said, well, let's touch base next week. I spent the entire weekend reading the book, because I'm like, I need to know who this guy is. And for me, when I read his book, that's when it just the door just opened up, in the sense, in my mind, because as you know, when you read his book, it talks about how he started. Like, he's not some rich tycoon guy that had a silver spoon in his mouth. He was orphaned at 14. And when I read the story, I was like, no, I can connect with this guy, because he's just like me. I was homeless as a young teenager, but mine was nowhere near as dramatic as the experience that he had. And he had to fend for himself and his younger brother from the age of 14. I was like, okay, yeah. And so the following week, we touched base, and I'm like, yeah, I'm game. Let's go. And it's one of the best, if not the best, business decision I ever made. Well, actually, in truth, be honest, wasn't even business because it was friendship, you know. And I have to say why I love him is because he saw something in me. I mean, he said, Tony, I see your heart, you know, you're special. I ain't even going to charge you, like, because I want us to build something. And that really just speaks of the kind of man he was.
Yeah, completely. I mean, he was very much wanting. I remember, sadly in some ways, but I remember somebody else was running an event in London. I forget who it was now. And Errol was speaking at that event. So he was coming over to London. So he'd called me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he'd called me and said, "Oh, you know, I'm doing this event. We're going to be there for a couple of days. You got to come join us." And he sorted out all the, you know, like Errol just being Errol, he just sorted everything out. You know, he sorted out the hotel. He sorted, you know, everything's taken care of. And so I arrived there, and I remember in the first morning we'd gone in, we'd met the guy that was running the event, met his team, all seemed very lovely people. Watched this guy do the opening introduction to the couple of days that he was running. And then Errol and I had gone up to Errol's room. We were chatting, and he was very much kind of like saying, "Look," he said, "I've probably got 10 years at best." He said, "You've got to learn from me." He said, "That's what this is about." He said, "You've got to learn from me." He said, "You've got to take what I've got and you've got to leverage it. You've got to use it to make a bigger impact." He said, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah. I mean, we're literally sat there, and you know, at the time, because I'd met it because he'd come over to London once before when he was on his way to Switzerland, and it was just after he'd had spent a lot of time in that clinic in LA where they were working on his heart.
Right.
And, you know, they pretty much extended his life by a couple of years without a doubt. But so he'd come over that time, and then he'd gone back, and he'd gone to Switzerland, then he'd gone back home, and then he was coming back out again. And so obviously we got hooked up, and he knew he hadn't looked after his health. He knew that. And he was very open about that. He said, like, you know, he said, I really haven't looked after it. He said, but, and he also said to me, you know, in private, very much that he felt that at times, if you look back over his life, there were times where he probably spent too much focus on the money and not enough focus on family or other things. But by the same token, he was like, you know, you get people who are brilliant in whatever field they're in, whether it's in physics or whether it's in, you know, whether there's phenomenal athletes or whatever it may be. But Errol was just a phenomenal entrepreneur. And so that understanding that he had of how the whole of entrepreneurship works and how you build a phenomenally successful business around whatever you want to do, that framework, that understanding, just second thought, you weren't going to get that kind of education in school. You weren't going to get it in an MBA. You weren't going to get it anywhere. You know, this was from somebody who had developed it over from 14 onwards. So a 60 odd year career. Those kind of insights weren't coming from anything other than somebody putting themselves out there, pushing back the boundaries, learning as they went, and then crafting it into a formula, a pattern, a template to actually, you know, leverage it and replicate it on a regular basis. And that's what he really wanted me to get from it.
Yeah. And you know, he shared that template, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because he shared that with the EDI group, the group that he put together. And you're right. I mean, he was a phenomenal guy, a man with a great vision. You know, he was ahead of the curve in the sense that he realized that the way forward for people, the ordinary person, was that they needed to take their lives more seriously and become more responsible for creating the life that they wanted to create through entrepreneurship. And hence that's why his vision for 100 million as a community, that's where it came from. But I don't know, before we go into talking about the template, what was your experience? Because certainly for the last sort of 3 years working with Elle, I must say it was kind of embarrassing, but I never seen anyone work so hard. I couldn't keep up with him. Did you find that? Like, he worked flat out.
Yeah, I think he loved what he did, and he loved working. And yeah, he'd sort of drop me messages at ridiculous times of day or night. And, you know, obviously sometimes he'd be in Toronto, I'd be here, or he'd be in Vancouver. And it was like, there's a big time difference. And so, you know, what might be the middle of the afternoon for me was like 4 o'clock in the morning for him, but yet he'd still have been working through the night, or he had an idea and he couldn't rest until he kind of got it out. Or for sometimes, like, he's reaching out to me because he wanted to talk to me about it and he wanted to explore it with me, you know. And it was just, and I'd say to him, I said, look, you're looking a little tired. I think you should take a break. I think you should take some rest. You got to look after yourself. But he just had this drive that he just couldn't rest until he got something out and got it formulated in some way. Then he could take a break, you know, and he obviously that was part of who he was. But yeah, he could outwork anybody. I mean, that was just phenomenal drive.
At that age, and with all of the health conditions that he had, it just makes you wonder what was he like in his heyday. I mean,
yeah.
You know, he shared with me a photo. I think you may have seen it as well. Back in, I think it was 1992, when he was supporting, mentoring Tony Robbins.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, wow, this man has been, you know, he's been doing this, running his own businesses. But I mean, look at Tony Robbins today, you know, and I know that having the support of someone like Errol is just phenomenal for someone starting out. I mean, you know, I read something just recently saying that Tony Robbins is, you know, worth something like 600 million today. You know, well, if you've got someone like Errol in your back, you know, in your background, it's definitely going to push you to do some great things. So tell us a little bit about the template that.
I would just add though, before we get into it, I'll just very quickly add, I know, you know, I mentioned this event that the person that was running the event, I can't remember their name, and we were there in London at this thing. But in the green room with the other speakers, there was a young woman came in, and she was going to be speaking later that day. And her business was food-based, so some sort of food product that she was putting together. And do you remember when we were kids? I don't know if you ever watched it, The $6 Million Man. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I remember when it used to come up and like it'd have this sort of instant breakdown or this thing where he'd look through his eye and he'd see all these different things. And it was almost like that watching Errol, because he started asking this young woman questions about her business and where she was at in terms of revenue and what she was doing. And he literally just drilled down and was able to, he understood every single industry. I don't think there was an industry he hadn't worked in. So he just literally broke down her whole business and then just drilled down into all the areas. And it was really interesting watching her, because to begin with, she wasn't really listening. Like she was just like, oh, here's Errol, he's just another speaker. But then as he started asking questions, and she began to realize, to her credit, that this guy's a lot more savvy than she's given him credit for. And then, of course, as he drilled down even further, she started to go, actually, this guy's giving me ideas. And he was making suggestions based on her answers of what she needed to do to take it to the next level. Wow. Now, whether she did or not, I don't know. But it was interesting watching his ability to take somebody's business and within minutes map out the next level for him.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's what
or the next 2 levels or 3 levels, you know.
That's what he was really great at doing, and so quickly. I mean, he was just so sharp. You know, when he focuses on you like that, he'd give you the kind of side look, and that's when he starts drilling. And within 2 minutes, he's got you, and it was just incredible to see him work like that. I know one of the things that there's a couple of sayings that he has said over the years that really just stayed with me, and one of them was about I think one that I love was quitter never wins and a winner never quits. And
because it's very much that focus, isn't it? And it's that you've got to have that vision, and you've got to have a focus, and you just got to stay with it without a doubt.
Yeah. But so succinctly summed up. You know, there's been times when I've thought, you know, is this right? And then I remember that phrase, and I'm like, well, actually, if you quit, then you can't ever win.
You can't ever win. No, of course not. Yeah.
So it's just really incredible, some of the things that he used to say. And as I said earlier on, he talked about the mind being like a parachute, you know, because so many of us, our minds are closed to even the possibilities of what could happen. And so if our minds are closed, then it's done before we even started.
And you see this today. I mean, I've had conversations with people where they start explaining what their problem is, and out of a desire to help, it's like, well, I want them to look at it differently. And you can even, you make suggestions. Say, look, well, there's like right now, there's so many opportunities available. The internet has opened up almost an infinite number of opportunities from a business and financial perspective, which didn't exist 10 years ago, definitely didn't exist 20 years ago. And you can say things to people, like I've tried saying things I know this is being recorded, so don't let her in on this, but even my sister, you know, I've said things to my sister over the years, like, you could do this, it's like, yeah, but. Yeah. It's like, well, they just close down. It's like, unless you're open to the possibility, you will never explore it. And if you don't explore it, you'll never find out. In which case, you're not getting out the starting blocks. You're never going to get anywhere.
Absolutely. And in effect, that's exactly what happened with us. Because when we had that conversation, you said, look, Tony, I just want to help. Those were your exact words. And I was like, well, yeah, I don't know this area. But obviously in the back of my mind, I'm hearing Errol say, yeah, you two should work together. So I'm like, okay, let's explore. And we gave ourselves that opportunity to explore. And it, you know, that's indicative of what's required in this new season, right? You've got to be able to explore. And of course, with all things, you know, the first couple of months, it was, you had a vision in terms of what you wanted to see. I didn't know what it was that you needed to see. And we were just trying to make it work. But then, as you had said, Tony, probably in the last month, it'll all start to come together. And it certainly did, in terms of, we've learned so much, and in terms of myself, Natty, and the team. But it's also shown me possibilities that I just didn't know existed, in terms of what can be done and how you can take content, and once you've got that content, just use it over and over and over again to build, you know, audiences. I mean, it's just been amazing. And so I'm glad that we're hooking up next week and coming down to have a chat and see how we can mastermind and take this to another level with, you know, with that combined energy in terms of your creativity, the strategicness, your business savvy, and hopefully the GPS intuitive spiritual element as well, because that's the other thing that you haven't said, and I'd like to touch on that before we get into the template that Errol left, because what I've observed of you is that your business is different in that it does actually come from that spiritual perspective, or that spiritual space. I mean, that's my observation. What would you say? Would you say no, Tony, or would you disagree, or what was your?
I'd agree. I think I come from a place where I guess I look at the world through the lens of, you know, on a personal level, there's me, there's my family, you know, so there's a basic take care of everyone's needs. But then I kind of look at it in terms of the whole world and think, well, I want to be able to help everybody take care of their own needs. And that ties in with Errol's vision as well of 100 million entrepreneurs. Because to him, an entrepreneur is just someone who can support themselves, who can stand on their own 2 feet. You know, like, no one's coming to rescue you. The government can't rescue you. You know, a pension can't necessarily rescue you. Like, nobody's coming. It's like, you got to be able to take care of yourself. And so it's tied in with that. So from my point of view, it's a human thing. You know, we're all humans. We all share this planet. We're all meant to help each other on some level. And so I've always approached it in that way. And that's where the spirituality aspect comes into it for me. We're all humans. It's like, there is no point me making a couple of million a year for me personally, if it doesn't in some way isn't reflecting the fact that I get to help a couple 100,000 people, a couple of million people, and the ripple effect of that. What's the point? There is no point me hoarding money, or me going, well, look how great my life is. Look, I've got a Lamborghini for every day of the week. It's like, what's the point of any of that if I can't go, well, actually, all my brothers and sisters that I share this planet with, I get to help them as well. I can't get my head around why would I even want to do that? Why would I? And this isn't about, you know, I've seen words thrown around on the internet like elites and capital. You know, it's like, got nothing to do with that. It's just a human spiritual level. I want to take care of me, and I want to help everybody else take care of themselves. And in my mind, that's like raising the consciousness of the whole planet.
There you go. You see, you just took the word. I'm just trying to say it, and you took the word right out of my mouth. That's how we roll. But you're absolutely right. It's that raising the consciousness. And I'm reminded of the Is it Roger Bannister, the 4-minute mile runner? You know, that when he ran his 4-minute mile, supposedly it was a very rare thing. It hadn't been done before. But once he ran that 4-minute mile, and the consciousness has been raised in that everyone now was like, okay, that thing that was impossible is now possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
A bunch of people started running 4-minute miles and under.
It just took off because it's like the belief that it was possible shifted.
Right.
And now, I mean, today college kids run 4-minute miles. It's not.
Absolutely.
It's kind of just
we can do the same thing where business is concerned, where people are thinking previously that running a business is practically impossible, or you've got to be spoon fed. No, it is about being responsible and being committed. And there were some principles, some tools, some guidelines, which if you begin to employ them, then they can make the journey a lot more enjoyable. So,
I mean, on a practical level, the number of sheer volume of opportunities that are available, and secondly, the barriers to entry, practically non-existent. Certainly from an internet point of view, you don't need to be, you don't need to buy a shop or rent a shop. You don't need to store a whole bunch of inventory. You don't need all those startup costs, which would have been necessary pre-internet days. All of that's gone. Yeah. And you're not kind of restricted to your local area or a 10-mile radius or a 20-mile radius in terms of who you can serve. You've got the globe. So the barriers to entry are tiny, if there are any. I mean, if you've got access to the internet, which most people have, obviously, if they're listening to this, they have. So if you've got access to the internet, you've got a laptop, that's it. You got everything. The rest of it, we can work out as you move forward, and you can start reinvesting some of your profits to grow faster, but you can get started.
Yeah. And I guess the getting started is really where we hit the first kind of hurdle, in as much as Errol talked about being stuck in Busyville, that sometimes, we think that we are being busy, we're being active, and as a result of being active, we're getting a lot of things done. But he talked about and coined the phrase, which was part of his template, if I recall, productivity versus activity. Do you remember that one?
I do, yeah. So, and for him, productivity, this is where the commercial focus comes in. The productivity is what's ringing the dinner bell today. Like, in other words, what's making sales today. Obviously, and there's still, to this day, I see a lot of people, particularly in the coaching world, where they have a strong desire to help people, and they've got all these skills as coaches, but at the same time, they get locked in I don't want to be a salesperson. And they have perceptions of what that means, none of which are true anymore, but they still have these perceptions of like a 1950s door-to-door salesperson, and that keeps them locked, not doing the things they need to do. But from Errol's point of view, productivity, each day, what are you doing that's actually genuinely productive? In other words, what rings the bell? You can't help someone. Because for me, this probably ties it all together. When I was certainly maybe 10, 11, around that age, I remember the news being on at home, and it was when there was all the problems and troubles in South Africa. But I remember Bishop Tutu coming on the TV, and he talked about this. It just stuck in my head. He said, "You don't help the poor by being one of them." And that really, it stuck in my head. It resonated even from that time. And it's like, you want to make a difference, take care of yourself, then you can start taking care of other people. And that's always been a guiding belief within my head, but it's that you've got to get out your own way. You've got to recognize that if you want to help someone, they're coming on a journey with you. And therefore, people, by human nature, is that people are a little bit more reticent about something that's new or different or that's an unknown for them. And so it's your role to make what is an unknown a known. It's your role to guide them and influence them to get them on that journey. And then it's part of your business role then that there's an exchange of value, so that you benefit as a business. You can go on to help more people. They benefit from the service, the coaching that you provide, so they get the impact on their life. And then obviously there's a ripple effect of that, because there's an impact on their family, on their children, on their community. So you just continue moving down that path and keep moving, but you've got to get out your own way. So that start point of people getting started in business is actually the hardest step. It's getting them to build momentum is the hardest step. And it's not lack of opportunity. It's not lack of anything. It's just people getting their own bloody way. And so they need someone like yourself to come along and give them a slap and coach them and get them over that first step, but getting them out of their own way. Yeah, but as you know, because you also support people in that,
the teacher can only appear when the student's ready, So as you said, even you're talking about your sister, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And this is this is the thing that we find. But you're absolutely right about that whole momentum. And so what I would add to what you're saying is that in order to be successful, you've got to be teachable. You've got to be a student in some respects, because, any successful business person knows that you can't know everything. And so
it's impossible.
If you don't understand the limitation of what you know, then you're in trouble.
And that ties back with Errol. Errol was a great believer in coaches and mentors, because whenever he got to a sticking point in his business, he wouldn't try and solve it by himself. He'd look for somebody who already had the solution. I remember him telling me one time that who's the guy who wrote is it Neil Blanchard wrote the 1 Minute Manager or whatever the book's called? Okay. And who moved my cheese and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's Neil Blanchard. And Errol told me, he said, I rang that guy up. He said, because I needed to know. He said, I was an awful manager in the beginning. He said, and it was causing a problem. He said, but I realized I needed to be I think what he was great at was having the awareness to recognize when he needed to develop a skill set or when he needed to develop an area. And so he realized he was crap at being a manager. He was being far too pushy and bullyish, and that wasn't helping. So he rang Neil Blanchard and said, I need your help. Come and mentor me, come and guide me. And Neil didn't want to do it. And so from Errol's point, he was like, look, I'll stick 10 grand a month in your account for the next 6 months. Come and help me. And I'll be on the next flight, So it's like Neil was there. But that was his approach. His approach was, I'm missing something. I'm missing a skill set. I'm whatever it is, I need a mentor. I need a coach. And he'd done that all the way through. So he was never shy at getting help and never shy for paying for it either, because he recognized obviously the impact he would have on his own growth.
Right. So what would you say to someone, because someone's listening, people are listening and they're thinking, well, okay, that might be great for Errol because he could just stick 10 grand in someone's pocket. But what if somebody, they've got this vision, they've got this idea, they want to start a business, but they don't have a wad of money to be paying a coach, a retainer, a business coach. I say that because I know this is a concern that you've had and looking to develop things to mitigate that. So what would you say to someone who's in that situation?
Yeah, first of all, there's a lot of information that obviously you got your hands on just through the internet. So from a knowledge base, there's certainly enough knowledge out there to get you started. All businesses really, from a standing start to the first sort of level within a business, all businesses are really about sales and marketing. So in the beginning, your 95% of your focus is sales and marketing. And I would say within that, it's hard these days to separate them, even though there's sales and marketing. From my point of view, they're all the same thing these days. They're all influence. And so from the beginning, it's like, how do you build an audience? That's how I would perceive it these days.
Wow. But then if that's the case, though, because I see many people, they're not hearing or they're not understanding what you just said. If you're saying it's 95% sales and marketing, they're busy spending loads of time trying to get the product together. What you're saying is that you need to have clarity about what your product is and you need to get out there to try and start selling it or doing an exchange with people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. I'm saying your business is going to be successful because you add value to an audience. So call it an audience, call it a niche, call it however you want, but a niche exists because they have a conflict. The niche exists because they have a problem that needs solving. So you're there to solve a problem. So if you start putting together your product, you're assuming you know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. That might not be the case.
Oh, wow. So, but then what do you do? So you're almost saying it's like a chicken and an egg situation. You've got to start taking those steps to engage with those individuals with what you've got, but you've also got to be open enough and paying attention to be able to be fluid and take the signals, because they might be saying, well, actually 10% of what you said is great, I want that, but the other 9% you need to go and work on that.
Yeah. So you've got this you've then got this situation where you want to get to market, you want to get in front of a customer as quickly as possible. And Errol was a great believer in this. He was a great believer, like all of us want to, like particularly in the sort of information and coaching world, we all want to be talking to thousands of people at one time and looking at it into like I've got 6,000 people on my membership program and they all pay me this much. Like, that's great. And that's part of your vision without a doubt. But in the beginning, and Errol was very focused on this, it's like talk to one person, then talk to another one person, then talk to another one person, and start noticing the commonality, start noticing the patterns, start noticing what's getting in their way. That's how you start developing your product. And your product, if it's a coaching program, you're building your coaching program using your skill set around what your customers are telling you is their biggest problem and their biggest desire.
And I mean, this is just so perfect because the classic example of that is, so we're working and I have started doing some testimonial recordings of, and it wasn't even on a conscious level, but I remember we had a conversation and I'd begun to do this testimonials, and we were having a discussion once, and then it came up and I said, well, let me send you 2 or 3 of those testimonials. Do you remember? And she's actually here, I think, tuning in. And one of them was Sharon and Michael only, actually. They're both here. And you're like, I like that, Tony. Why don't we just let's just test the market to see how it resonates from a female perspective and then from a male perspective. And I was like, okay, let's put some big budget behind. And you're like, no, Tony, just a little budget, because we just want to test it. And I was blown away that within 3 weeks, and I fed back to Sharon that her particular piece resonated with so many women. We'd had over 7,000 views in just a few weeks. And I was like, wow, because what that did, that gave me even added confidence in that, yeah, Paul, right, there is an audience that are into,
totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So really powerful stuff in terms of what you shared. So really it's about, if you've got an idea and if you want to develop a business, get in front of a customer as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And not just, and I mean a customer, like Errol's phrase was, nothing begins until something is sold. Like nothing begins until something's talked about. Like you can say to people, oh, would you buy this if it was in red, yellow, and green? And everyone goes, oh, yes, I'd buy it. But actually, when it comes to putting money across, all of a sudden those people disappear. It's like, no, what are they actually willing genuinely to put money into? And you'll only know that when they buy it. So you need to get in front of people, talk to them, and then sort of feed it back to them and say, okay, so I've got this program, it's going to do this and this for you. It's going to cost X amount. Are you in?
But then, as you said, for a bunch of people, that asking for the money, it's a hard thing. And look, I must confess, I was one of those guys because, as you know, and it was even almost doubly so, because I'm coming from the not-for-profit sector. So just look at the title, where, I never for 20 years had to ask people for money. And by design, we structured our business so that we went and got funding, or we got investment from companies that covered the cost. So I didn't have to have that conversation with people. So when moving into this new world where we had to do that, I kind of struggled. And that was one of the things that I love Errol for, because, I'd do a webinar and nothing would happen. And I'll be like, okay, well, no one's interested. Maybe the product ain't working. And then one day Errol said, but have you called them? And I'm like, no, I haven't. He said, call them up, find out. And this is the whole notion of getting in front of a customer. Find out what they didn't like or what they did like. And so when I picked up the phone and began to speak with people, oh my days, it was a game changer, because people then were able to really communicate. And what I realized, that for the community that I was serving, they weren't just going to be impulsive purchasers like that. They wanted to be able to ask questions on a one-to-one. And so while I made myself available, they felt comfortable. They could ask their questions. I could allay their fears. And hey, presto, I'm like, are you kidding me? So just that piece of information changed everything.
Yeah,
Wow.
completely. Yeah. And the money side, that's what I mean by people getting in their own way. They get concerns about asking for the money. They start letting all of what they perceive as what sales is. Like the word sales comes from the word selje, which is a Scandinavian word, which means to serve. Sales means to serve.
Wow.
There has to be an exchange of value. But that's what I mean. People get in their own way about all this stuff. And it's like, just get out your own way. Like money isn't finite. The amount of money keeps growing, as more innovation comes into the world. So there's plenty for everybody. You just got to be willing to ask for it. As Errol was saying to me, you're not asking for enough.
And this is where I guess what I call the poverty mindset, or as Michael only says, stinking thinking comes into play. If you're thinking from a perspective of scarcity, then you're not going to ask for more, are you? Because
But on a spiritual level, if you're thinking about scarcity, that's what you're going to get.
Well, absolutely. You know this, and there lies the problem for people. And this is why I'm kind of really excited about the work that we're going to be doing, because we're going to bring both of those elements together: the business, and the new way of being in this new era. Fuse them together and see what kind of magic we can create. So it's going to be amazing. Well, I want to pause right now because we're at 9 o'clock, and I know that we need to go into our private Q&As for people who want to find out a little bit more about the template, and you may have some questions. So for those of you who are in our Facebook group or YouTube, well, we put the link in. So if you want to join us, then click the link and then come join us on the inside. If not, then join us next week, Friday, when I'll be continuing the theme of business, money, and finance. And I look forward to seeing you then. So for now, stick around, members, and I'm going to stop live streaming. Till next week, from me and from Paul, enough love.